the historical context and causes of the Great Roman Civil War. The 1st century BCE was a crucible of ambition, conflict, and transformation for the Roman Republic. It was a time of extraordinary men, but also of extraordinary turmoil. In this era, names like Sulla, Marius, Cicero, Crassus, Pompey, and Caesar loomed large, their actions shaping the fate of a republic that had stood for nearly 5 centuries. Yet, even as they brought glory to Rome, their rivalries and power struggles sowed the seeds of its eventual destruction. The story of the Great Roman Civil War, the confrontation between Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great, is one of ambition and betrayal, strategy and sacrifice, all set against a backdrop of political decay and social unrest. But how did Rome, once a bastion of republican ideals, descend into civil war? The answer lies in understanding not only the men at the heart of the conflict, but also the society and politics that enabled them. Setting the stage. Imagine a city-state turned empire, brimming with wealth and power yet teetering on the edge of chaos. Rome in the 1st century BCE was a paradox. Its conquests brought vast territories, unparalleled riches, and a diverse population under its dominion. But this expansion also strained its political systems, creating cracks that opportunistic leaders would exploit. As the Republic grew in power, so too did its inequalities. Landowners amassed fortunes while small farmers struggled. Senators engaged in endless disputes, paralyzing governance. And in the midst of this instability emerged figures who recognized an opportunity to reshape Rome to their vision. The early moments of the documentary draw viewers into this tumultuous world, asking a provocative question: was Rome's greatness its curse? The answer unfolds through the lives of its most powerful men. The fragility beneath the glory. The Roman Republic was built on a delicate balance of power. At its core was a constitution designed to prevent tyranny. Authority was divided among various magistrates, with checks and balances ensuring no single individual could dominate. Yet, this same system became its Achilles heel. As Rome's territories expanded, the complexities of managing an empire exposed the system's inefficiencies. The Senate, originally a council of aristocrats, became a battlefield for competing interests. Wealthy patricians clashed with the rising plebeians, who demanded greater representation and rights. The assassination of the Gracchi brothers in the late 2nd century BCE marked the beginning of Rome's political decay. These two tribunes had championed land reforms to address the growing divide between the elite and the common citizens. Their deaths set a precedent. Violence was now a tool in Roman politics. Over the next decades, this instability would spiral out of control, leading to revolts, purges, and eventually civil wars. The rise of strongmen. Amid the chaos, military leaders emerged as the Republic's most powerful figures. Gaius Marius, a general of humble origins, revolutionized the Roman army by recruiting landless citizens and promising them land in return for their service. This change created a dangerous dynamic. Soldiers became loyal to their generals rather than the Republic. Marius' reforms would have far-reaching consequences, laying the groundwork for future leaders like Sulla, Pompey, and Caesar. Marius' protege-turned-rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, seized power in 82 BCE after marching his legions on Rome, a shocking breach of tradition. Sulla declared himself dictator, purged his enemies, and enacted reforms aimed at restoring senatorial authority. Yet, his actions demonstrated a chilling reality. The Republic systems could be bent to the will of a determined individual with enough military backing. This precedent emboldened future leaders. Pompey, a brilliant young general, gained fame for his campaigns in Sicily, Africa, and the East, earning the title Magnus, the Great. Meanwhile, Julius Caesar, a charismatic patrician with a populist streak, was steadily building his own power base. These two men, once allies, would become the central figures in the Republic's ultimate crisis. The First Triumvirate and the seeds of conflict. In 60 BCE, Caesar, Pompey, and the wealthy Crassus formed an unofficial alliance known as the First Triumvirate. Together, they controlled the Republic's political machinery, bypassing traditional institutions to achieve their goals. Caesar used his position as consul to push through land reforms for Pompey's veterans and secure a governorship in Gaul, where he would embark on a decade-long campaign of conquest. Crassus, the richest man in Rome, provided financial backing and sought military glory in the east. However, this alliance was fragile. Crassus' death in 53 BCE during a disastrous campaign against the Parthians removed the buffer between Caesar and Pompey. The death of Julia, Caesar's daughter and Pompey's wife, further strained their relationship. With no personal ties to bind them, the two men drifted apart, each wary of the other's ambitions. The breaking point, by 52 BCE, Pompey had aligned himself with the Senate's conservative faction, the Optimates, who viewed Caesar as a threat to the Republic. Caesar's victories in Gaul had made him immensely popular among the people and his soldiers, but his growing power alarmed the Senate. When Caesar's term as governor ended, the Senate demanded he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. Caesar knew this would leave him vulnerable to prosecution and likely exile or death. Faced with no other options, Caesar made a fateful decision. In January 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River with his army, uttering the words, "Alia iacta est," the die is cast. This act was tantamount to declaring war on the Senate and Pompey. The Republic was now on the brink of its most devastating conflict. Reflections and analysis. The events leading to the Great Roman Civil War highlight the fragility of political systems when confronted with unchecked ambition and social inequality. The Republic's fall was not the result of one man's actions but a culmination of decades of systemic flaws, power struggles, and missed opportunities for reform. Caesar's decision to march on Rome was born from a mixture of necessity and ambition. He believed in his ability to reshape the Republic, but he also understood the personal stakes. Pompey, on the other hand, found himself caught between loyalty to the Senate and his desire to maintain his own dominance. As the curtain falls on this first act of the story, the stage is set for a war that would reshape the Roman world. The audience is left with a tantalizing question. Could the Republic have been saved, or was its destruction inevitable? In the next chapter, the clash between Caesar and Pompey will take center stage, revealing the true cost of ambition and the price of power. The campaigns in Italy and Spain. The Great Roman Civil War had begun, and its flames first ignited on Italian soil. Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon in January 49 BCE marked a bold, irreversible step into conflict with Pompey and the Senate. Yet, as the dust settled on this monumental decision, Caesar faced a daunting reality. The fate of Rome, the Republic, and his own ambitions would now be decided on the battlefield. This chapter delves into Caesar's campaigns in Italy and Spain, highlighting his strategic brilliance, the unraveling of Pompey's plans, and the socio-political ramifications that reverberated through Rome and beyond. The lightning advance into Italy, a sudden march southward, with the words "Alia iacta est" still echoing in the crisp January air. Caesar wasted no time. Leading the battle-hardened 13th Legion, he advanced rapidly into Italy. His strategy was audacious yet methodical. Seize key cities and disrupt Pompey's ability to organize a cohesive defense. Caesar understood that speed and psychological impact were his greatest weapons in these early stages. The people of Italy, weary of years of political strife and economic stagnation, often welcomed Caesar's forces. In some cases, cities opened their gates without resistance. Caesar's policy of clemency towards captured opponents further boosted his image as a liberator rather than a conqueror. It was a calculated move, intended to win hearts and minds while undermining Pompey's narrative of Caesar as a tyrant in the making. Pompey's retreat. Meanwhile, Pompey faced a critical dilemma. Despite his reputation as one of Rome's greatest generals, he found himself unprepared for Caesar's rapid advance. His legions in Italy were outnumbered and scattered, while his veteran forces remained stationed in Spain and the east. Rather than risk a premature confrontation, Pompey opted to retreat southward, evacuating Rome and regrouping at Brundisium with plans to escape to Greece. This retreat was not without its consequences. Pompey's decision to abandon the capital was a psychological blow to his cause. Many Romans, especially those in the Senate, viewed his actions as a sign of weakness. In contrast, Caesar's swift occupation of Rome solidified his image as the man of action, a leader capable of decisiveness in a time of chaos. Rome without Pompey. Upon entering Rome, Caesar convened what remained of the Senate. Standing before them, he declared his intent not to dismantle the Republic but to restore it. Yet, actions spoke louder than words. He seized the state treasury, a controversial move that provided the financial resources necessary to fund his campaign. This act symbolized the shifting power dynamics. Rome's fate was no longer determined in the Senate but on the battlefield. The Spanish campaign begins. The strategic importance of Hispania. While Italy was critical as the symbolic heart of the Republic, Spain, or Hispania, was the key to long-term victory. Pompey's legions in Spain, led by seasoned commanders Afranius and Petreius, represented a significant threat. Caesar recognized that neutralizing these forces would eliminate a major pillar of Pompey's military strength and secure his western flank. Crossing the Pyrenees. In the spring of 49 BCE, Caesar marched westward, leaving Mark Antony in charge of Italy. His forces included veterans from the Gallic Wars, whose loyalty and discipline would prove invaluable. Crossing the Pyrenees, Caesar encountered resistance from local tribes allied with Pompey. However, his troops' experience in guerrilla warfare allowed them to overcome these obstacles swiftly. As Caesar's legions pressed deeper into Spain, the psychological impact of his reputation preceded him. Towns and tribes along the route often capitulated without a fight, choosing to align themselves with the apparent victor rather than risk destruction. The Siege of Ilerda. The pivotal moment in the Spanish campaign came at the city of Ilerda, modern-day Lida. Here, Afranius and Petreius had fortified their positions, anticipating Caesar's arrival. The terrain favored the defenders, with high ground and the Sicoris River acting as natural barriers. Caesar's initial attempts to provoke a decisive engagement were met with caution. Afranius and Petreius refused to abandon their advantageous position. What followed was a masterclass in strategic maneuvering. He launched a campaign of attrition, cutting off enemy supply lines and winning over local allies. Starvation and low morale began to take their toll on Afranius' forces, forcing them to consider retreat. The turning point, when Afranius and Petreius finally attempted to withdraw southward, Caesar's cavalry intercepted their movements. In a series of skirmishes, Caesar's forces harassed the Pompeian legions, slowing their advance and forcing them into a precarious position. Surrounded and out of options, Afranius and Petreius ultimately surrendered. Caesar's clemency once again played a pivotal role. He allowed the defeated soldiers to return home. The broader implications, the socio-political impact. Caesar's victories in Italy and Spain were not just military triumphs. They were transformative events that reshaped Roman society. His clemency policy, while strategic, also underscored a fundamental shift in Roman warfare. Unlike Sulla's purges or the Gracchi's violent deaths, Caesar sought to avoid wholesale bloodshed. This approach contrasted sharply with Pompey's alignment with the conservative optimates, who clung to traditional power structures. The strength of loyalty. One of Caesar's greatest assets was the unwavering loyalty of his troops. These were men who had followed him through the brutal campaigns of Gaul, men who had seen his brilliance firsthand. Their trust in Caesar was not blind. It was forged in the crucible of battle. This bond would prove decisive as the war progressed, enabling Caesar to achieve feats that others deemed impossible. Pompey's waning influence. For Pompey, the losses in Italy and Spain were devastating. Not only had he forfeited key territories, but he had also failed to counter Caesar's narrative. Caesar's portrayal of himself as a restorer of Roman values resonated with many, while Pompey's retreat tarnished his image. Yet, Pompey still held the advantage in numbers and resources. From his base in Greece, he prepared to launch a counteroffensive that would determine the war's ultimate outcome, a foreshadowing of things to come. As Caesar returned to Rome in triumph, The stage was set for the next phase of the conflict. The campaigns in Italy and Spain had demonstrated his strategic brilliance and ability to inspire loyalty. Yet, they were only the beginning. The Republic's final act would be played out on the plains of Greece, where Caesar and Pompey would face each other in a battle that would decide the future of Rome. The audience is left with a sense of anticipation. Caesar had proven himself as a military genius and a master of propaganda, but could he maintain his momentum against the full might of Pompey's coalition? The answer lay in the coming chapters of this epic saga. Pompey gathers forces in Greece. The great Roman civil war had become a clash not only of armies but of ideologies and ambitions. Julius Caesar had swept through Italy and Spain, dismantling Pompey's immediate defenses with startling speed. Yet the war was far from over. While Caesar consolidated his western flank, Pompey retreated eastward, gathering strength among the wealth and manpower of Rome's eastern provinces. This chapter examines Pompey's preparations in Greece, Caesar's pursuit, and the mounting tension as the two titans prepared for their inevitable confrontation. Pompey's strategic retreat. The flight to Greece. Pompey's retreat from Italy was not an act of cowardice but a calculated maneuver. Abandoning Rome allowed him to avoid a premature confrontation with Caesar's battle-hardened legions. Instead, he focused on leveraging his significant advantages: the vast resources of the eastern provinces and the loyalty of many senators and nobles. His plan was to rebuild his forces, gather allies, and draw Caesar into a battle on favorable terrain. From his base in Greece, Pompey commanded access to key ports and shipping routes. This control allowed him to amass supplies and reinforcements from across the Mediterranean. It also gave him time to regroup, training new recruits and reorganizing his forces into a formidable army. A coalition of the Republic. Pompey's position as the Senate's champion attracted support from across the Republic. Many senators viewed him as the last bulwark against Caesar's perceived tyranny. Prominent figures like Cato the Younger and Cicero joined him in Greece, lending political legitimacy to his cause. Additionally, client kings in the eastern provinces, grateful for Pompey's earlier military campaigns, pledged their loyalty and resources. This coalition of Roman elites and provincial allies provided Pompey with an army that, on paper, dwarfed Caesar's. Reinforcements from the east. The eastern provinces were a treasure trove of manpower and wealth. From Asia Minor to Egypt, Pompey drew soldiers, supplies, and funds to support his campaign. Greek cities like Thessalonica and Athens provided logistical hubs, while client kingdoms such as Pontus and Armenia contributed troops. The Eastern legions, many of whom were veterans of Pompey's earlier campaigns, brought experience and discipline to his forces. Caesar prepares for the chase. The decision to pursue. Caesar's victories in Italy and Spain had been decisive, but he knew the war's outcome depended on defeating Pompey himself. To delay would give Pompey more time to strengthen his forces. Despite the logistical challenges of crossing the Adriatic and confronting an entrenched enemy, Caesar resolved to bring the fight to Greece. His decision was as much about strategy as it was about momentum. Caesar's rapid successes had demoralized his enemies and bolstered his reputation. A prolonged stalemate risked eroding that advantage. Additionally, Caesar understood the symbolic importance of confronting Pompey. Only by defeating him could Caesar claim the undisputed leadership of Rome. Logistical challenges. Crossing into Greece presented significant hurdles. Pompey's naval superiority, bolstered by fleets from Egypt and the eastern provinces, made a direct crossing perilous. Caesar's forces lacked a comparable fleet, forcing him to rely on daring and ingenuity. He divided his forces, sending part of his army across the Adriatic under Mark Antony, while he remained in Italy to oversee reinforcements. The crossing itself was fraught with danger. Pompey's fleets patrolled the waters, intercepting Caesar's supply lines and threatening his troops. Yet, Caesar's boldness paid off. Despite these challenges, he successfully landed a portion of his army in Greece, establishing a foothold for his campaign. The tension mounts. Pompey's defensive strategy. Once in Greece, Pompey adopted a defensive posture. His strategy was to draw Caesar into a battle on terrain of his choosing, where his superior numbers and cavalry could be used to maximum effect. Pompey's forces were well supplied and fortified, allowing him to sustain a prolonged campaign. He hoped to wear down Caesar's smaller army through attrition and supply shortages. Pompey's strategy reflected his cautious nature. Unlike Caesar, who thrived on bold maneuvers and calculated risks, Pompey preferred methodical planning. His approach was rooted in traditional Roman military doctrine, emphasizing discipline and overwhelming force. Caesar's countermeasures. Caesar, however, was not one to play by conventional rules. He understood that time was not on his side. Every day Pompey's forces grew stronger, and Caesar's supplies dwindled. To counter this, he employed a mix of audacious tactics and psychological warfare. One notable example was his siege of the port city of Dyrrhachium. By cutting off Pompey's supply lines, Caesar aimed to force a confrontation. Though the siege ultimately failed, it demonstrated Caesar's willingness to take risks and his ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The human element. Divided loyalties. The war was not just a clash of armies but of ideologies and personal loyalties. Many soldiers and citizens were torn between their allegiance to Pompey, the defender of the Senate, and Caesar, the charismatic reformer. Letters and accounts from the period reveal the anguish of those caught in the conflict, forced to choose between tradition and change. The role of propaganda. Both sides employed propaganda to sway public opinion. Caesar presented himself as the protector of the people, emphasizing his clemency and commitment to reform. Pompey, meanwhile, positioned himself as the guardian of the Republic, rallying support among the aristocracy and conservative factions. This battle for hearts and minds was as crucial as any skirmish on the battlefield. The calm before the storm. As the campaigns in Greece unfolded, the stage was set for one of the most decisive battles in Roman history. Pompey's forces were vast, disciplined, and well-equipped, while Caesar's troops relied on their experience and unshakable loyalty to their leader. The tension between these two forces mirrored the broader conflict tearing Rome apart, a struggle between old and new, tradition and ambition. The audience is left on the edge of their seats, anticipating the epic showdown to come. How would Caesar overcome the odds stacked against him? Would Pompey's caution prove his undoing? The answers lay ahead, in the fateful plains of Pharsalus. The climax and aftermath of the great Roman Civil War. The confrontation between Caesar and Pompey had been brewing for years. From the political machinations of the Senate to the battlefields of Italy, Spain, and Greece, the conflict embodied the struggle between the old republic and a new, uncertain future. As the two most powerful men in Rome prepared for their final clash, the fate of the republic hung precariously in the balance. This chapter delves into the climactic battle of Pharsalus, the aftermath of Pompey's defeat, and the profound transformations that followed Caesar's rise to power. The Battle of Pharsalus. Setting the stage. By August 48 BCE, Caesar's forces had closed in on Pompey's position near Pharsalus, a plain in central Greece. Pompey's army, numbering over 50,000 soldiers and supported by a strong cavalry contingent, was vastly superior in size to Caesar's 22,000 men. Yet, Pompey's numerical advantage concealed underlying vulnerabilities. His coalition was politically fragmented, and his troops, though numerous, lacked the cohesiveness of Caesar's veteran legions. Caesar's forces, though outnumbered, were seasoned warriors. Their loyalty to Caesar was unshakable, forged in the brutal campaigns of Gaul and solidified through his policy of clemency. These men were not just soldiers. They were Caesar's instrument for reshaping Rome. The opening maneuvers. Pompey's strategy was straightforward. Use his superior cavalry to outflank Caesar's forces and overwhelm them. He deployed his cavalry on the left flank, supported by light infantry, while his main body of troops remained stationary. Pompey hoped to wear down Caesar's forces and force a surrender without unnecessary bloodshed. Caesar, however, anticipated this move. His years of experience had honed his ability to read the battlefield and predict his opponent's intentions. To counter Pompey's cavalry, Caesar concealed a reserve force of infantry behind his right flank, instructing them to target the legs of the enemy's horses, a tactic designed to neutralize Pompey's cavalry advantage. The turning point. As the battle began, Pompey's cavalry charged, initially forcing Caesar's right flank to retreat. But as they pursued, they found themselves ambushed by Caesar's hidden infantry. The reserve forces struck with precision, destabilizing the cavalry and creating chaos in Pompey's ranks. With his cavalry routed, Pompey's left flank crumbled. Sensing the opportunity, Caesar ordered a full advance. His legions surged forward, breaking through Pompey's defenses and turning the tide of battle. Pompey's forces, disoriented and leaderless, fled the field. By the end of the day, Caesar had achieved a decisive victory, capturing thousands of enemy soldiers while suffering minimal losses. Pompey's flight. Defeated and humiliated, Pompey fled the battlefield, seeking refuge in Egypt. His escape marked the end of his military career and the beginning of his tragic downfall. For Caesar, Pharsalus was more than a military triumph. It was a validation of his vision and leadership, solidifying his position as Rome's preeminent figure. The aftermath of Pharsalus. Pompey's death in Egypt. Pompey's arrival in Egypt should have been a chance to rebuild and regroup. Instead, it became his final chapter. The Ptolemaic court, embroiled in its own power struggles, viewed Pompey as a liability. Seeking to curry favor with Caesar, they assassinated Pompey, presenting his severed head to Caesar upon his arrival. Caesar's reaction was one of grief and outrage. Though Pompey had been his rival, Caesar respected him as a Roman and a former ally. Pompey's death, rather than resolving the conflict, underscored the fragility of loyalty and the ruthlessness of politics in this turbulent era. Caesar in Egypt. Caesar's arrival in Egypt marked the beginning of another chapter in his storied career. Entangled in the dynastic struggle between Cleopatra and her brother Ptolemy XIII, Caesar sided with Cleopatra, both politically and personally. Their alliance, and their romantic relationship, solidified Caesar's influence in the region and further expanded Rome's sphere of control. Mopping up resistance. Even after Pharsalus, Caesar's work was far from over. Pockets of Pompeian resistance remained in Africa and Spain, requiring further campaigns to secure his dominance. These battles, though smaller in scale, were no less significant. Each victory brought Caesar closer to unifying Rome under his rule. The transformation of Rome. The end of the Republic. With Pompey's death and the defeat of his allies, the Roman Republic's days were numbered. Caesar returned to Rome as a victor, celebrated with triumphs and hailed as a hero by the populace. Yet, his accumulation of power and reforms signaled a shift away from the Republic's traditional structures. Caesar's reforms. As dictator, Caesar implemented sweeping changes. He expanded the Senate, granted citizenship to more people in the provinces, and restructured Rome's calendar, introducing the Julian calendar, a legacy that endures to this day. His policies aimed to centralize authority and stabilize the Republic, but they also alienated the conservative elite. The seeds of assassination. Caesar's rise to power was not without consequences. His reforms, though popular with the masses, threatened the established order. A faction of senators, fearing the loss of their influence, began plotting his assassination. Their actions would culminate in the Ides of March, a tragic irony that the man who reshaped Rome would fall victim to its enduring tradition of political violence. Reflections on leadership and legacy. Caesar the Visionary. Julius Caesar's military genius and political acumen reshaped Rome and set the stage for the Roman Empire. His ability to inspire loyalty, adapt to challenges, and seize opportunities made him one of history's most compelling figures. Yet, his ambition also revealed the dangers of concentrated power. Pompey the Cautionary Tale. Pompey's story is one of unfulfilled potential. A brilliant general and a loyal servant of the Republic, his caution and adherence to tradition ultimately cost him the war. His defeat serves as a reminder that leadership requires not only skill but the willingness to adapt to changing circumstances. The Republic's legacy. The fall of the Republic was not the end of Rome, but the beginning of a new chapter. The values and institutions of the Republic would influence the Roman Empire and, through it, the broader Western world. Caesar's triumph and Pompey's downfall reflect the complex interplay of ambition, power, and ideals that continue to shape history. A new Rome, the Great Roman Civil War, was a turning point, not just for Rome but for the ancient world. It marked the transition from a republic ruled by many to an empire ruled by one. Caesar's victory at Pharsalus and the events that followed transformed Rome into a global superpower, setting the stage for centuries of dominance. Yet, it also raised enduring questions about the balance of power, the cost of ambition, and the fragility of democratic systems. As the story concludes, the audience is left to ponder the legacy of Caesar and Pompey. Was the Republic's fall inevitable, or could it have been saved? And what lessons can we draw from their lives as we navigate the complexities of leadership and governance in our own time?